Following is an in-depth story analysis. If you haven't seen this film, you might want to before listening to this review. Hey folks, how's it going? It's time for another Superhero Rewind Unscripted podcast, and today I'm tackling Power Rangers 2017. And you know, it's fitting that a movie with so many missed opportunities merchandises a clock that somehow fails to include the phrase, "It's morphin' time." Like, really? It's a clock. Like, if you're making this, it would say it's morphin' time, right? In the words of Rita from this movie, how? All right, so it is the 30th anniversary of Power Rangers this year, and it just kind of lined up this way. I had announced this at the end of last year and had planned on getting this done a week or two ago, but we're here now, and it just kind of happened to line up for the 30th anniversary. I'm probably going to be doing a lot more Power Rangers stuff all through the year because I have a really nice excuse to do it, and so kind of cool that we're doing that right now. And I've got a lot of notes. I've got a lot to say about this, so I'm going to try to kind of stick to stick on book as much as possible this evening. And I've got a lot of criticisms, a lot of some positives certainly, but I know this is kind of a polarizing film. There's a lot of folks that really still like this movie and a lot of other folks that don't. I was real mixed on it when it came out. I think I've liked it less every time I've seen it, and I'm going to front load this with quite a bit of criticism, so strap in. If you're a big fan of this movie, you will hear some positives as we go along. But I want to open by saying this is the best Power Rangers movie. There are only 3 of them, and that's not saying a lot. Being the best Power Rangers movie is like being the best modern Star Trek series. So the movie did not perform real well, and there's kind of a big question as to why. Is it because it wasn't Power Rangers enough, or is it because there wasn't enough of a built-in audience in the first place, and then nothing with that IP, no matter what it is and how it's presented to people with the words Power Rangers in it, with Mighty Morphin or otherwise, is going to win over a new audience? It's real hard to say, but it did absolutely bomb. It made $142 million against a $105 million budget. The word of mouth was somewhat strong on this one, I thought. I saw people kind of coming out of the woodwork, surprised that the Rangers had a little bit more character dimension, maybe a lot more than they expected based on the TV show. Some people really did appreciate the way it was modernized and reimagined, and there was kind of some buzz about it there for a second, but it didn't do real well, and it will be fascinating when another reboot comes out in the not-too-distant future, because Hasbro is working on one, of course, and we've been hearing about this since 2019. They're making, if they're still sticking to the same initial plan, it's supposed to be a time travel story that takes place in the 90s, and I've been real leery about this whole thing because it sounds like it's liable to be self-aware in the wrong kind of way, and a nostalgia trip in the wrong kind of way. But I guess we'll see if it learns the right lessons from this, and it uses more of the original iconography of the show, and tonally it's closer to that. It will be really interesting to see if that's what this needed to succeed. And also, it's hard to say because, 7-8 years after this comes out, when that finally happens, because we're already 6 years past this, which is wild. I didn't mean to take this long before I finally sat down and did a rewind on it, but it'll be a different time. Those of us that grew up with this show will already be in our early to mid 40s, so it's kind of hard to say. It might have been, this clearly was not the, perfect timing for this either. And had it come out more around Avengers or even before Avengers, had it beaten Guardians of the Galaxy to I want to say the cosmic punch, it doesn't do enough with its space and alien stuff, of course, but if it happens right before that or right after that, it's really hard to say how exactly it does. The only lasting thing, this movie created, weirdly, is the Power Rangers Legacy Wars phone game, which is a really good mobile fighting game I used to play quite a bit. It's still around, and as far as I know, it's the only thing that still somehow has licensed, I suspect because of original contracts when that came out, to use the movie and everything from the TV shows. The only thing it doesn't have is 1995 stuff, because nobody has access to that has other Power Rangers licenses, but I think that's the only thing right now that is allowed to combine the two series. There is, of course, no sequel to this coming out, although there almost was, which is really weird, and I'll talk about that in a second. There is one follow-up comic book. So the closest thing we have to a sequel to this is a comic that Boom did that sees the Rangers fighting a bunch of putties, and then I think it's been a while since I read it, I think a classmate that becomes a monster. It was okay, I remember. It's written by Ryan Perot, who is a big powerhouse for Power Rangers now. In comics, it came with, I've got the regular size version of this too, but it came with the Steelbook if you bought that. And also, before I get too far ahead of myself, I want to mention, I love this Steelbook. It's a really wonderful release, and shockingly, the menus for this movie are really professional and really polished. It's not like the Warner Brothers menus where it looks like it was, they just put the background of the cover of the movie on the menus, and then it looks like the rest of it was just made in Microsoft DVD Maker or something. It looks spectacular, and it uses the orchestration of the Wasserman theme of the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers theme that was in some of the commercials, I think, or if not, there was that kind of slow melody version of it, dun 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 dun, that tried to get you riled up and go, oh, this really is Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. It's just kind of repackaged, and then that is nowhere to be found in the movie except for the one token place that the theme plays, which is just ripped out of the 1995 movie, which is very strange. Anyway, I don't know why that's not in here, because it's good, and I'm assuming that Brian Tyler wrote that also for the movie, and it didn't make it. One of many, many missed opportunities, as I said, with this film. So, as I was saying, it did almost get a sequel despite poor box office because, and I'll never understand this, apparently the merchandise broke sales records. Again, Rita Repulsa, how? I saw so much of that stuff. Maybe they just made an insane amount of it, expecting it to do even better than it did, even though it broke records. I don't know. I don't see how. I saw so much of that stuff in clearance and just staying on Walmart and Target shelves for months and even years after the release of this movie, particularly the morphers. I think they were supposed to be morphers. It's weird because we don't actually have morphers in this movie. They were like the power coins that I guess sort of double as morphers, and the swords, and and especially the big deluxe Megazord. That stuff stuck around forever. It broke record. Like, they almost made a sequel to this because of how well the toys sold. And I'm going to talk about how this is a terrible toy commercial, but apparently it did well. I can't get my mind around that. It's very strange. So right out the gate, I want to talk about this as a reimagining. There's a fine line that you walk when you make a thing like this, trying to update the material for a modern audience, but also trying to make pre-existing fans of the material happy. It's a fine line you walk between reimagining and just adapting the Wikipedia page. As Dan Torrey said years ago when he and I reviewed the 2014 Ninja Turtles movie when that first came out, I will always go back to that phrase now because I love it, and we see it all the time. Things that look like the people that made the movie did 6 seconds of cursory research. They looked at the Wikipedia page. Maybe they watched the first episode. That's all they saw. There is some of that happening with this as well. Both writer and director of this movie claim to be fans of the original, but they don't sound like fans of it in their commentary. I listened to this commentary. It's a little painful. I'll talk about why as we go along. They seem like fine guys. They're not Power Rangers guys, and they kind of pretend like they are, and I find that a little bit cringeworthy. At the very least, because I can, as I've always said, things don't have to be exactly like source material. If you can rework a lot of things and still come up with something really creative and clever and at least as good as what came before, or, kind of hard to compare. We can argue about whether it still counts as the same thing. My go-to example for this is the Constantine movie versus Hellblazer. Fine movie, not exactly Hellblazer. They're still really creative with it. They still did some really, neat things with that story. But at the very least, don't pretend like you're a bigger fan of the material than you actually are. Their homework and or passion for the material does not translate to the screen if they haven't, if they've done any of that. It is an adaptation of just the first episode with the green coin thrown in because everybody knows about Green Ranger. And Rita as the original Green Ranger is a cool idea. I have some issues with it being the first villain that we fight, and I'll deal with that a little bit later. But it does kind of bug me that they act like they grew up as, and they're like my age, or at least the director is Israelite. He's 38, and he says he grew up with this material, and maybe he did. Maybe he just didn't bother to go back to very much of it at all. But you wouldn't have to see anything besides Day of the Dumpster to make this movie. I think it's important also to note the distinction between tone and spirit, and that also, I think, can be kind of a tough tightrope to walk. But tone and spirit, or essence, if you like, are different things. You can change the tone of something, but if the essence isn't there, it starts to look more generic. And this, in places, is Power Rangers enough, and in places, it feels like it could be anything with the Power Rangers skin just slapped on it. I think smarter and darker and more sophisticated Power Rangers made for the adult audience that grew up with it can be made and could be wonderful without changing the essence of the material, the spirit of it. And a family entertainment that bridges the gap for adults and kids is possible. It doesn't have to be hard-edged. It doesn't, like, it can have an edge to it in the sense that it's not just, corny, sappy, feels like it's just for 6-year-olds. You can find that nice middle place where it is for families and your kids can watch it, but it's more sophisticated, it will surprise you, it will let itself go to darker places. In effect, family entertainment that challenges children rather than trying to give them nightmares at night. And it doesn't have to be Power/Rangers. We don't have to have, drunk Power Rangers or, murdering Power Rangers in order to take this mythology and this idea and make it more of an adult thing, lowercase a, something that is for everybody, but geared as much for us as it is for kids. Having said that, it is also difficult with Power Rangers specifically to find that line between cheesiness and sophistication, because there is kind of the question, there's an argument to be made that if you don't have camp, you are not Power Rangers. Can you do Power Rangers without the camp? I would say to some degree. I think that there is an inherent absurdity to the material in the first place, to all of your superheroes wearing bright primary colors, and just a lot of the situation in the first place, what the aliens are, Zordon in a tube, all of that stuff. But I mean, come on, there's a lot of inherent absurdity to Marvel and DC stuff also that we just take for granted as serious, fine family entertainment now. So yes, I think that it absolutely can be done. The film's creators just don't have the love for the source material that they claim to, as I said, and I think it shows in the work some. It is, and I'm not saying, my apologies, guys, my camera just messed up here. Everybody give me just a moment, and I'll be right back. All right, sorry about that. I am back. So I'm not saying that the movie doesn't work because of silly things that a director said in a commentary, but I think it does give you a little bit of context for some of the points I'm going to make about how uninspired I think some of this is. And again, I just don't want the guy to pretend like he's a fan if he's not. There's the most cringeworthy part of his commentary for me is when he says, when you get to the place in the third act where you get the obligatory cross streets, where we've got to throw in some Easter eggs, and the easy way to do that is pick pieces of lore or creators that are involved in something, put their names on street corners, and we get Mariner Bay and Reefside. And he says, I love all the Easter eggs that we put in this movie. If you know the show, Mariner Bay is a street. And by the way, he at no point brings up any other series in his commentary besides Mighty Morphin. And I'm not trying to be a prude about this. I'm not trying to be a fanboy. But he talks about how there's 24 years at this point of lore, and it almost sounds like he doesn't even realize there are other series besides Mighty Morphin. Mariner Bay is the city from Lightspeed Rescue, and it's not a street in Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. He doesn't really know what he's talking about. Another thing that would be really interesting to see would be a parallel universe in which this movie doesn't get made until after the Boom comics start, because that hadn't happened while this was being developed yet. And we have had some more sophisticated stuff now for years, things that bridge the gap some, sometimes not as much as I would like to see it, and I still don't like that the comics try to be canonical and have their cake and eat it too, and not just be a straight-up reboot, straight-up reimagining, but it's been absolutely a step in the right direction, and I think even more recently, it's been quite a bit better. The origin for Zordon and Lord Zed that was done recently in the Boom comics between Mighty Morphin and Power Rangers, the two books, is really quite cool. And I think this would be a very, very different movie if that stuff had happened already. And I also think that it dates it quite a bit, and it doesn't hold up as well. There's a novelty with this when it first comes out, because you've never seen this bit of extra dimension added to these characters before. The original 5 haven't allowed to be flawed, really. They always get along. They don't really make a lot of mistakes. We go too far in the other direction, in my opinion, here. I don't like that they all have to be delinquents, but I do appreciate that they seem more like real people. That is not the novelty that it once was, because I've seen that done now with something closer to the actual characters that I grew up with, and playing around more with the lore and their background and being more clever and creative with it. Another big issue with this movie is that it's just not toyetic. You have to be a good toy commercial to be Power Rangers, or to have the essence of Power Rangers, I think. I don't think that's a thing that you can change, no matter how smart and serious your story is, and still be Power Rangers. The costumes look pretty cool on screen, which I was surprised by. I actually like them okay in practice. But the toys suck. They're just not good. And nothing else looks particularly great in the movie either, with the exception, I think, of, like, Alpha 5 is okay, and the Zordon being in a wall is kind of cool. I get the memes. I get why everybody made fun of it, where it looks like one of those metal boxes with the pieces that kind of flow up and down. I also think that he looks like an old 90s Puzz 3D puzzle. But that was one of the more inspired changes if you had to change things. No matter how serious you want your movie to be taken, there are elements, some more absurd than others, that feel like cheating if they're missing, like morphers and a morphing sequence. Just real basic stuff that even Star Trek 09 made sure you had. Like, no matter what they changed, you still had phasers, you still had communicators, you still had tricorders. There is a line that you cross, and we may not all think it's in the same place. This is somewhat subjective, but it's a review. I'm giving you my opinion on this, where a reimagining has so little to do with the original that it shouldn't be called that anymore, and this does push that line pretty hard. You want all the elements that made it unique in the first place to be there, even if you update them. A good example of this is the super serious but still shockingly faithful Space Ghost comic series. I think it was 6 issues maybe, by Alex Ross in the late 90s or early 2000s. Everything that makes Space Ghost what it was is there, but it's dark and sometimes gritty and violent. It's totally ridiculous if you think about it for 5 seconds. It's got that inherent absurdity, but all the characters play it straight, so you forget how absurd it is, and you're taken in by it, and you buy into the internal logic. That's what a serious Power Rangers should look like. That's what I want, and not a thing. And luckily, this doesn't go as far with this as it might have, and as it almost did. You also don't want a thing that is, again, too self-aware and has the characters in it making fun of the material. There is too much, oh, Power Rangers, that sounds weird, that's a little corny, of an attitude from our characters, but at least it doesn't go as far as some of the Marvel movies do with that kind of thing, like recently Spider-Man No Way Home with Otto Octavius's name. That is a bridge too far for me in a comic universe where people are going, oh, that's really silly, that that he's got a name like that. I'm like, look at the world you live in. The writer, his name is, oh, I don't have it in front of me here. I've got it in my notes. I'll bring that up in a little bit. But the writer in the commentary mentions that there was a line that they cut, and I'm so glad they did, where one of the Rangers, I think it's maybe Trini, everybody calls her here, complains that Rita is, or maybe it's not, I forget which character, that Rita Repulsa is a silly name, and why don't we just call her Chloe Repulsa? I'm so glad that's not there. You also have to have martial arts in your Power Rangers movie, and this has like 16 seconds of that. Power Rangers is all about that. How do we not have at least one character whose hobby is martial arts? It's not Power Rangers really if you don't have that. There's a lot of things that you can reimagine and that they do in fine and okay ways that I'll talk about later, but those are things that I don't understand why you can't keep them intact and still be more sophisticated and less corny. Like, the Power Rangers doing martial arts does not make it corny, really. And again, it's a superhero thing. We have plenty of fighting in superhero movies, and choreographed fighting. How is there less consistent lore in this than the original? The only thing that fans would want from a reboot of Power Rangers, and I say reboot, by the way, in air quotes, because the series was continuing as this movie came out. So I went into this going, I mean, of course it wasn't Mighty Morphin anymore, but technically the continuity that we'd had, for better or worse, because Neil Saban is terrible, but for better or worse, it's not like this was paving over any kind of continuity like Star Trek 09 ostensibly was. Eventually, we got back to it, also ostensibly, if you count the newer Star Trek shows as canon. I have a difficult time with it, but I digress. With Power Rangers, you weren't really rebooting. It was a secondary continuity. It was a, it was another thing. I don't know. It was a different choice. You could watch the original, or you had this, but the original was still sort of technically on. And I guess my point is, I went in going, well, at least it's not paving over anything. So if it sucks, like that's unfortunate, because I've always wanted something more serious, doing something interesting with the lore. And then when we didn't get that, I realized I guess I wanted that a little bit more than I realized, just because I always thought there was so much potential in the iconography and some of the ideas with Power Rangers that were never really taken advantage of enough in the original series. And some subsequent series certainly do more interesting things and let characters act more like real people. For Power Rangers, comparing it to itself. But I did think that there was every reason to make something that gave you a specific set of rules that you about how the powers really worked, and not being so vague about where everything comes from and what it means to have power as a Power Ranger. What abilities do you really have specifically? What is the Morphin Grid? How did Zordon wind up in the tube? These are all questions that never really get answered until the comics, and this doesn't do any of that either, and somehow does less than the show does. The director, Israelite, says, "We wanted the look of our version to be totally its own." He says that in his commentary. Well, you failed. It does look like Transformers and other IPs you mentioned that you were trying to get away from. It's bland and not memorable, and it looks like that all the way to they're feeling the need to make, like, particularly the Megazord looks like a Transformer from the Michael Bay movies, and they felt the need to make a Bumblebee reference in the film. They know that. I don't understand why he said that. All you gotta do is take what worked and change what makes it not appealing to most people who didn't grow up with it past the age of 7. So A, you need a mythology that's fleshed out with its own well-established rules, as I said. B, characters that are three-dimensional, have clear goals, aren't interchangeable, and aren't perfect. Now, it is better with that than with anything in the film. And C, a villain with a clear motivation. Does she want to rule the world or destroy it? And who, if pure evil, somehow became that way and didn't just start there? So we'd understand what happened to her. This movie wants to do that part of it, but doesn't give us enough about who Rita was as the Green Ranger, so it still reads more two-dimensional than it should. And if you're trying this hard, as it sounds like he is, to subvert expectations and you want to look like you're taking risks, it's also really weird that there would be so many similarities to the 1995 movie. And let's go ahead and just list them, shall we? Now, some of these are, I'll admit, one or two of these are a little bit of a stretch, and there's one that is intentional, although I don't totally know why, but I'll get to that. First, both villains spend the whole movie trying to create or dig up monsters that will fight the Rangers in a Megazord fight at the end. Next, both sets of Rangers spend the whole movie trying to morph, either getting new powers or making their powers work in the first place. Both villains were buried on Earth and are unearthed at the beginning of the film. Both movies are kind of about Zordon coming out of his tube or wall, although he doesn't do it in this, but in both it's kind of about saving Zordon. Here, it's not really saving him from death. He's trapped in the wall. He's not in a time warp in this version, I don't think, because it's not talked about that way. He literally is in the wall, even though it looks like kind of a big digital screen. And in this version, he is kind of manipulating the Rangers to try to rescue him, as opposed to the much more altruistic thing in the first movie. So yes, they're different, but it's weird they both have that. Both movies see their Rangers fighting giant rock monsters. Both movies have villains with a gross motif. Ivan's ooze, Rita's gold, which is also kind of oozy. Both villains possess their giant monsters and sort of grow huge themselves at the end. In the theater, I could not believe this went there. Both movies use the same version of Go-Go Power Rangers, except this one is too cool for Mighty Morphin in the title, so when it gets to that part in the song, it just fades out. Both movies have a version of I've Got the Power in the credits, and that's a thing that Israelite actually, I was surprised he mentioned it. I was surprised he'd seen that movie brought up. He said in the credits he wanted that song because it was in the 95 movie. I don't know why, but that's what they did. It's like, let's have a callback to that. Okay. Both movies are non-canonical with the original series, which it goes without saying for this because it's a reboot, but that is a similarity that it has. The movie is like Amazing Spider-Man in a way. The character work is better than the superhero stuff, and both of those things really need to work in tandem to create a cohesive whole and to create a cohesive tone, and neither of those things are as good in this movie, even as they are in that. Like, as not impressed with the superheroing as I am in Amazing Spider-Man, I mean, it's better than this. It feels like a movie made by committee. I'm really tired of saying that about modern movies. And I mean, to be fair, plenty of that in the 90s and stuff too, but I feel like I'm saying it more now than I ever used to, especially with these compromised films that feel like there are whole scenes missing and a lot of connective tissue that's gone, and this has that problem in spades. There are 33 minutes of deleted scenes, and some of them, it might have been nice to have them back in for some character work and stuff, but most of it is really unnecessary, and I really expected to watch that and go, oh, okay, here's more about Billy figuring out where the Zeo crystal is, or here's something that explains what really did happen to them after they got hit by the train. No, none of that is in there. It still feels like there's all this stuff missing, so I don't know if it was ever in there, because the movie, and I'm getting ahead of myself, does feel like it's plotted scene to scene, and I would love to get my hands on this script and see if there's some stuff that wasn't filmed or if they just left it on the cutting room floor. It's also really weird how much Israelite does not want to talk about deleted scenes in the commentary. He kind of avoids it, where he's talking to the writer and he's like, the writer keeps bringing them up and he's like, yeah, they're on the Blu-ray, like they can go watch them. Let's not talk about that. I thought that was a little bit suspect. So like I said, it feels like it's made by committee. There is something here for everyone, but once again, disparate elements that don't come together to really make a whole. Movies are, of course, naturally collaborative, but you want it all to feel of a piece, and this doesn't. It's like watching a 2-hour game of keep away. The ball keeps getting thrown to uninitiated teenagers and young adults who like Marvel movies but don't care about Power Rangers in the intense character drama scenes, and then it goes back to hardcore fans with the silly stuff like with the Krispy Kreme, and even some hardcore fans didn't like that whole thing. I will defend Krispy Kreme till I die. I'll get to that a little bit. That's a bit I actually really, really like in this movie. But ultimately, there's a tonal balance that is never found. I'm learning also that a lot of my favorite moments in this movie were either improvised, almost dropped from the movie, or both. The opening scene was almost axed. That's insane. Can you imagine this movie without that? And I needed more of that. I wish it had gone on longer. Like, I wanted to be, like Krypton from Man of Steel, and, give us at least, 15 minutes of that. By the way, some weird combinations of movies happening here. This movie is four things besides The Breakfast Club. The Breakfast Club is obvious. As far as genre stuff and superhero things especially, it's four things. It's Star Trek 09. And by the way, Roberto Orci almost produced this, and he may have written a script that was ultimately rejected. And there's a couple other people that did too. Max Landis did one, and I think a couple of components from his script made it into this. But he has done a breakdown of what he wanted to do with it on his YouTube channel. I saw that years ago. But anyway, it's Star Trek 09. It's Chronicle, of course. It's Amazing Spider-Man, and it's Man of Steel. It struggles with finding a balance between the serious and realistic and the absurd and comedic. Sometimes it doesn't want to be Power Rangers at all, and sometimes it does, and will hide behind the ridiculousness of Power Rangers anytime something is confusing or doesn't make sense. So anything that works, especially in deeper character work, or anything that really is smarter than Mighty Morphin, it wants you to pat it on the back. Anything that doesn't work and it wants to scream, hey, it's Power Rangers, hold me to that standard. That stuff was always corny and random and not well thought out, so we can do that here. Again, that's not to say that you can't come up with a tonal balance where you can still do some of the sillier stuff, but it does that with logic, and that's my problem with it. The clear comparison for modern reimaginings is Ninja Turtles from 2014. It makes some of the same mistakes, but it is head and shoulders above that movie. It's not insulting or unwatchable, it just doesn't do enough with the lore, and it feels like it could be anything. It was a novelty to see Power Rangers handled this seriously with characters that felt more real then, but as I said, now we've got the Boom comics. And then there's the question of trendiness. Like, is it really modernizing things? I think with the some of the situations with the teenagers and how the actors play it, it absolutely is. But I think it's also very often placating to what's trendy, or even worse, to what was trendy a few years before it came out. The Man of Steel and Chronicle of it all already feels dated for this. Now, some of you guys are going to roll my eyes when I say this next part, because I go to this a lot, but this is actually not a thought I had in the theater. And then watch you go back to the first video I did on this, and I brought this up, but I really don't think I did. This really does feel like CW's Power Rangers, like Smallville or Arrowverse. It was even shot in Vancouver. So here's some examples. It's too good for too much of the lore and the characters. Its heroes have to be overly conflicted and the opposite of who we know them as, because it's supposed to be clever and ironic if they start from the opposite place. We need cute origins for names of things, like Mama Zord, although again, it could have been worse. Most of its references are Easter eggs before they're elements from the original thoughtfully reimagined. Again, the whole Mariner Bay and Reefside thing, Arrowverse did the cross street thing all the time. Ideas are made overly literal and are therefore genericified, like Goldar being a huge blob of gold with no face who only exists to dig up the Zeo crystal, and it watches like a 2-hour pilot that only has the budget to show its heroes in costume at the end, which budget is not the reason that happens, of course, but that's what it kind of feels like. And it forces in adult dialogue to look more legitimate or with the times, like the cow masturbation joke and the morph in the shower bit. Just kind of taking too many cues from Transformers, a shocking amount of masturbation humor for your Power Rangers film. And again, it doesn't have to just be aimed at 8-year-olds, but it would be nice if they were more included too. And also, it uses popular music to score scenes. Now, that's handled mostly pretty well here. I like some of the music in this movie in the context of this. I'm not a big modern music guy, but, modern pop stuff. especially that song during the montage where the girls are fighting over a donut. I like the editing in that quite a bit. The Kanye song at the end I don't like, but most of it works okay. Bryan Cranston really elevates the material, even though he has some of the weakest and most baffling and generic lines, which I'll get to a little bit later. But casting is absolutely the best thing about the movie. They went with the Superman tradition here, which is exactly right. You go to A-listers and great character actors for your mentor and villain, respectively. The director, so I'm going to make one more point here, and then we'll go to themes. Director Israelite, he talks about a lack of cynicism in the commentary, and it gets to that hopeful place when these kids come to care about and love each other. So don't get me wrong, like by the end, this is absolutely an optimistic film, and I like that. That stuff is fine, but I don't have faith in it from the beginning because of the unnecessarily muted color palette. Again, it's taking too many of its cues from Man of Steel, and antagonistic relationships seem forced in places, so that's not as earned as it should be. And that's not to say that there's not levity at the beginning, because there absolutely is. It just kind of hits me with a bad first impression, especially with, again, opening with a masturbation joke and that kind of thing. I also wanted to mention just very briefly the ethnicity changes to be more PC. I don't think that was necessary at all, but the casting is good, and that does help it to give it its own identity. And I don't mean to be hypocritical and say it should have its own identity, but it should be just like Mighty Morphin. I'm not saying it should be just like Mighty Morphin. It should just keep the things that make it Power Rangers, and I do really like this cast, so I'm certainly not going to hold that against it. Okay, let's go ahead and get into themes here, and we'll talk about what the movie is all about, as well as it handles that. So it's about the rigors of adolescence, mistakes you make while you're trying to find yourself. Are you your worst decisions, or can you forget the past and be, as Jason says to Kimberly, who you want to be? This was the stuff that most resonated with me on first viewing, and now I think that's an exceptional speech, and I really like that moment between them. Experimenting, that's not the only place that the movie is about that, of course, but that's where that really culminates. It's about experimenting with identity as a teenager, like when Kimberly cuts her hair on a whim just to feel in control of her image. It's about teenage rebellion. Where does that come from? Social expectations, adults who can't sympathize because they've forgotten what being a teenager was like. Peers who tear you down to build themselves up because they're going through the same difficult time in life. Mental or physical conditions that make you learn to think or act differently from others and set you apart. How do you turn from rebellion to maturity? You find a sense of purpose through accomplishment using your God-given skills. The Rangers are chosen by the power coins, I guess, because of their potential. I don't like the destiny bit. I really wish Zordon just picked them like he does in the show and we could just move on. This is actually a bit from the later shows that I wish it hadn't gone to. And I don't know if it was thinking about those or if that's just because that's a trope in a lot of Origin things like this, where there's a MacGuffin, there's an artifact that you don't choose it chooses you. It's too easy and contrived, and it doesn't give our heroes enough credit, and it seems like they go after screw-ups on purpose. A sappy, the coins need the Rangers, and the Rangers need the coins idea. You know, like the Morphin Grid cares as much about helping 5 random teenagers to find self-confidence and maturity as it does in making sure Rita doesn't get the Zeo Crystal and destroy the whole planet. But anyway, they choose to try once they put their personal issues aside and rely on each other. I like this a lot. Morphing becomes a metaphor for the necessity of friendship and just getting through adolescence. You're morphing from a teenager into an adult. I like that quite a bit. I gotta stop everything for a second and say this because I've never ever had this thought before about Power Rangers. Did they name him in Mighty Morphin Alpha 5 because it's a team of 5 Power Rangers? Is that why? Like, I've never had that thought before. Is that what? Maybe. Anyway, humans are a communal species, and we need each other to get through growing pains. We're all going through some of the same things, and it's easier if we do that together. So we see our heroes morph into something closer to responsible adults. It's about, you've heard me say this 19 million times in superhero movies, power corrupting. But in this case, there's a bit of a spin on it. What can stop power from corrupting you? The argument it makes for power not being necessarily a bad thing, although it's a difficult argument to make when in your first outing you're fighting a former Power Ranger who has corrupted that power. But I digress. So power corrupts unless you share power with people you care about and put them first. Rita is corrupted by power because she wants it all for herself, but the Rangers learn to be selfless and protect each other so the power protects them. That is an inspired way to utilize the philosophy of Power Rangers. Kind of weird that may the power protect you never comes up in this movie. But yeah, it's pacifism except for self-defense. Never escalate a fight, teamwork, and I'll get more into that a little bit later. It also asks the question, what makes you worthy of power? Is it strength and fearlessness, as Rita thinks it does, or maybe just ambition? Maybe that's her thing. Or is it selflessness? If you want power, you are not worthy of it. I think the movie handles that okay, too. It's about bullies and what they're driven by, which is insecurity. Just like the Rangers before they become Rangers. And they all have except for Billy, they all have the potential to be bullies themselves, not Billy. That's odd. He would never be a bully, and he has the closest name to that. Bullies need to feel powerful because they actually feel weak and inferior. Fear leads to corruption of power. Fear leads to anger. No, fear leads to corruption of power. You've got the bully that Jason slaps at the beginning, paying off at the end when the Megazord does the same to Rita at the end. So clearly she's supposed to be the cosmic bully. You have, and other movies have done this just as well or better, of course. You've got things like, again, Guardians of the Galaxy with Ronan. We kind of play him as kind of a crying child bully. You have the idea of individuality versus working as a team. This is another thing that I like a lot that I never thought about with Power Rangers before, and I don't know how intentional this was, but it jumped out at me, so I'm going to bring it up. You don't have to lose yourself to be part of a greater whole. It's not about a collective consciousness. It's not about being soldiers. We talk about them as warriors in this, which I like a lot better than soldiers. It's not about losing your personal identity for the sake of the whole. It's that each person brings something different, and they have to be different. Each Ranger has a different personality, strengths and weaknesses. They're not interchangeable. And this movie is going to the nines to make sure that its characters are not interchangeable. And when they come together, rather than going it alone, they create a unit. But they also help each other improve as individuals. The different colors in the costumes seem to represent individuality, while the uniformity in the design represents the unit. Which, again, I'd never thought about before, and I really like that. It's about leadership, not about being the strongest or having a great speech, but about setting the right example. When Zordon does this by resurrecting Billy instead of himself, Jason figures out how to lead, and the others learn to put their teammates first. And then, of course, you have conflict resolution. See, there's a lot of these kind of morals for teenagers and for children in a movie that I can't tell until the third act if the younger kids are even welcome here. Conflict resolution. Violence is a last resort. If you strike first, like Cobra Kai, you invite your power to corrupt you. That's why Billy dies at the dock. They take the fight to Rita and before they are ready. You're not supposed to do that. It's not just that they don't morph. The movie makes it too much about that, and I'll talk about the morphing thing later because it is a really stupid idea. It's a brilliant idea and a stupid idea at the same time. I will break that down after a bit. But It should be more about not escalating a fight, that you went there before you were ready and unprovoked. I guess you could argue it's provoked because of Rita coming to Trini earlier, but it does read like that's what it should be about. I think the movie makes it a little bit too much about just the costumes. Now, Billy's death is gimmicky, and it's really obvious he's not going to stay dead. I don't care what the director says in his commentary. He's like, everybody's forgotten at the point that he just makes a lot of assumptions about what everybody's feeling. I think he went to too many test screenings. Because he goes, at the point that Billy gets resurrected, you've totally forgotten, about that, and you're not thinking that there's any chance that he could come back to life. And I'm like, yeah, I am, though. But anyway, it does function as a sobering moment for the Rangers, both in coming to understand why they shouldn't, again, escalate a fight, and in learning to be selfless, like Billy, and then like Zordon. You also have a sign in the locker room at the beginning that kind of sums up the whole moral of the story, which is things are difficult before they are easy. And I kind of wish that the camera focused on that a little bit harder, although it might seem a little bit too obvious, but it took me several viewings before I caught that, and I think that is an important idea, and I like that it's in there. Okay, let's get into character motivations. Welcome if you just came in. We've got quite a few more folks watching at the moment. Okay, so character motivations with regard to insecurities that lead to seemingly uncorrectable mistakes. That's kind of what the whole thing is about, what everybody's got in common here. Mistakes that our heroes get over by finding purpose and self-confidence through friendship and teamwork. Some of these feel natural enough, and some are contrived. And the ones that are contrived start with a mistake rather than a motivation. We'll break these down very quickly. So I think that each character kind of represents an insecurity that all teenagers feel at one time or another. I think there is a lot of overlap. I think you can make an argument that that at least one or two of the things I'm about to mention could also be placed next to another Ranger. But I think for each of these, the one that I'm going to bring up is his or her biggest insecurity. So Jason's is anger. And this, by the way, also lines up really well with the Boom comics, although I like what they do with this a little bit more. In the Boom comics, Jason is a great leader and hates bullying because he started out as a bully himself and hated that he was that way. And it's interesting that he's so anti-bullying in this, and that this was before that. It's also possible that this inspired that to some degree. Anyway, so Jason's main insecurity is anger. He ruined his football chances and his reputation through a dumb prank, and his father and the rest of the town won't let him live it down. I think he's mad at himself as much or more as he is everybody else, but he's also mad at everybody else, and he really puts the anger in Ranger. That works better if you look at it in print. Jason seems entirely patterned, by the way, on Chris Pine's Kirk from, again, Star Trek 09, who has potential but is aimless and holds himself back. And they have a really similar performance. Kimberly's is guilt. She did a mean thing just to be mean and worries that makes her a bad person. Now, with Jason, we don't really know why he was pulling stunts like this, and in the first place, we don't really know where that came from, beyond just generically, he's a teenager, teenagers do dumb things, and he ruined his future, move on. Kimberly has a little bit too much of that, too. We don't know what motivated her to betray her friend and send a dirty picture of her to her boyfriend. She just does that, and the question is, does it make her a terrible person? I would like more of a background of why they felt the need to do those things when they did them. And yes, kids do dumb things, but I come to like these characters enough and they seem well-rounded enough that it's almost throwing them under the bus to just go, yeah, they did these really, really stupid things for no good reason. I never did stuff like that when I was in high school. I didn't know very many people who did. So it feels like the movie is kind of saying that all teenagers are delinquents, and that's not true. That's not fair. Anyway, Zach's insecurity is fear. His mother is sick, and he doesn't know how to live without her or how to live with her knowing she may die soon. Trini is ostracism. Her family doesn't accept her because she doesn't act as expected, and she worries they'll reject her for her sexual orientation. This is the one that's not at all resolved. Like, even Jason and his dad is sort of resolved by the end. I think the implication at the very end is supposed to be that Jason's dad realizes that it's Jason behind the helmet and that he actually is doing something worthwhile. I think it might have been nice to get some kind of recognition of that, acknowledgement of it before the movie was over. But with Trini, you just have a scene where she tells her brothers that they should like the Yellow Ranger and want to be her, and that's it. It's weird that none of that is resolved. Billy's is loneliness. He lost his father, doesn't have a male role model or friends, and he's autistic, so he finds it difficult to relate to or understand other people. Each of them wrestles with their dark or at least irresponsible sides, but none of them, are ever really tempted the way Rita was. So there's no clear parallel to Zordon and Rita's relationship. I would have really liked that. It would make the story a lot tighter to suggest why Zordon failed and Jason and his team succeeds. Rita does go to Trini and creepily tries to seduce her to her side, sort of, but all she really does is get Trini to lure her friends into a trap. And I mean, she tells them, like, this is where she says she's going to be, and then let's decide what we're going to do with this information. She doesn't betray them or anything. So that's not great. Anyway, okay, so then we get into Zordon and Rita, and they also have insecurities that are important. Zordon's is guilt over his failure to save his team and stop Rita from going to the dark side. He has lost his principles to some degree because he's willing to do anything to stop Rita now. It's not about mentoring a new team. It's about getting out of that wall and making himself feel better about his own mistakes, doing it all by himself, which is the opposite of what the Morphin Grid powers seem to be based on. Even though all it gives you is armor, I really don't like that. I really think that it should give you powers and armor, and that you shouldn't be able to have, hardly any Power Ranger stuff if you're not morphed. Well, I'm getting ahead of myself. We'll talk about all of that. I understand that some of the shows do mid-morph powers, and it'd be okay if you had one or two, but they're basically Power Rangers that just need to put costumes on. The morphing thing does not make any sense in this movie. Once Zordon sacrifices his chance to reconstitute himself, he finally becomes a real mentor, leading by example, and the Rangers are finally able to come together as a team. Although, put a pin in this, he may just do that because he can see the future. There's this throwaway thing about how Zordon can see the future, which he never does again, and he never talks about it again, and there are things that he knows that I'm not sure how he knows them, except for the fact that he can read the future, but it never comes up again, so it's really easy to forget about that, and I don't know if the movie remembers that he sees the future. So, it's possible that he's actually not being as altruistic as it seems like he is, and that he just knows that the only way to win is to let, kind of like a endgame scenario. The only way to win is to make sure that Billy dies and then resurrect him, and then he knows that the Rangers will defeat Rita, so he's just still manipulating events into that scenario. But again, that's never brought up, and I don't think that movie is thinking about this sort of thing, so it probably is not that. Omari Daniels, did Zordon see into the future to know that this film would be one and done? That's a good question. I don't think he did. I don't think, because he's part of the sequel bait at the end. So I don't think so. You know, when Jason comes in and puts his sword away in like a sheath thing in the command center in the spaceship, you know, the sword that he materialized out of his costume, and then he takes it off and I don't understand. There's a lot of throwing my hands up in the air when I'm thinking about this movie. Okay, so Rita's insecurity is resentment, and I guess she resents Zordon and his arrogance. We don't know enough about why she feels betrayed by Zordon, except that she saw herself as the outlier on the team and never fit in, and thinks that she's worthy of the power when maybe some of her teammates weren't. If this is a math problem, I have to answer not enough information. I'm also not sure how her friends all morphed, if she didn't care about them, because that seems to be the way the morphin grid lets you morph. But okay, everybody else overcomes their insecurities by trusting their friends. She gives in to hers and goes it alone, wanting to destroy all life, I guess, so she can have all the power of the universe, or in the universe, for herself. She is that villain that we're supposed to sort of sympathize with, because something, she got a raw deal somewhere, but she's also made insane, so that anything she does that is weird or doesn't make sense can be chalked up to madness. The Power Ranger villains are usually straight up evil. So I appreciate there's an attempt to make her like a Power Rangers villain, but have that come from somewhere. But like all the lore, remember, Eltar is never mentioned. We don't even know where Zordon comes from. He's got a whole language, but we don't know where he comes from. It's not remotely developed, so I have to infer more than I have evidence for. Maybe her power coin is corrupted somehow. It's the best I can come up with, since she can still use it without her team, and the Rangers here can't do that, and maybe that corruption has made her go crazy. But I'd like to know how she corrupts it without messing up the rest of the grid or any of that. And again, the whole team is able to still morph, even when she is betraying them. But she also has flashes of lucidity, which confuses the whole thing. Rita's only friend is the creature she makes to help her dig up more power, and he is made of gold, a symbol of greed. She wants to rule everything, and she's obsessed with gold. And so you have maybe the golden rule. You know, whoever has the gold makes the rules, and it's a clear Midas metaphor. All that symbolism, pretty on the nose, pretty obvious and right there. Okay, we are at an hour. I'm going to go ahead and take, pardon me, a couple-minute break, and then I'll come back and get into good stuff and bad stuff. Feel free to put in some questions and comments now, since I've gotten through the first half of my notes. And feel free to leave super chats or just regular questions, and I will answer some of those things if there's anything there when I get back. And everybody give me about 3 minutes or so, if you would. And thanks a lot for being here if you're watching live. Hope you're enjoying it. And I'm back. Thanks again for being here, folks. I am not seeing any direct questions. Donnie Pearson, speaking of Power Rangers crossovers, I hope for a comic book crossover with Star Trek. I'm kind of surprised that we haven't seen that happen yet. Chosen One thing is also inconsistent. Who said that? Pros and cons guy. Darklink 7, I'm thinking that a lot of the unanswered questions were going to be answered in the sequel that never happened. Yeah, maybe, but I almost think you would need a different writer and director because their attitude, they just don't seem interested in that stuff. It seems a lot more about just tone and atmosphere and generically making a movie about how teenagers screw up a lot and need some kind of sense of direction and need to feel important, and it being that kind of a catharsis. I mean, look at the way the movie is plotted. Again, it feels like almost scene for scene. A lot of that stuff is just not well thought out, and maybe in earlier drafts it is, and then they start axing things for time, but like the guy who wrote the movie doesn't seem to have any of those answers himself. Not that I want the commentary to tell me everything that ought to be in the movie, but they don't seem to think anything is missing. I'm pulling up his name because I had it in my notes somewhere, but I'm not seeing it now. John Gatins. So yeah, Dean Israelite is the director. John Gatins is the screenplay writer, and they both did that commentary together that I keep referring to. Okay, let's go ahead and get into good stuff now. So like I said earlier, I'm just going to front load right away. I am a big defender of the Krispy Kreme. I love it. It's hilarious, and it makes sense that the crystal would be under, as Israelite says in his commentary, a ubiquitous place like that. Power Rangers was always a commercial, and sadly, it's a better commercial for a thing that didn't even start as product placement than it is for actual Power Rangers merchandise. It's weird that that is more in the spirit of Power Rangers than the actual toys. I like it because it never read cynical and mean-spirited to me. And I appreciate the confirmation of it from those guys in the commentary, but I felt like I could kind of read that in the film. They're just looking for a really absurd, amusing place for that. I wanted more things like that in the movie. I've talked a lot about product placement with different movies. I think we brought this up some in the Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 rewind, where you've got the Dairy Queen there. It's not Dairy Queen because they gave James Gunn a bunch of money to put Dairy Queen in there. It's because that's a place he spent a lot of time at in the 80s, and he was writing from personal experience, and that seemed like the place to put that. This is not exactly that, but a little bit similar, where they're just looking around for, the perfect place that people would just regularly go to in their everyday lives. They kick around McDonald's, they kick around Starbucks. I like that they went to something that's not in every town, that might show up in a small town, in California, but wouldn't necessarily be everywhere in the country. We have them here in Kansas City, but I didn't grow up with them. I didn't even know what a Krispy Kreme was until I went to St. Louis. They've got them out there. So anyway, I think it's really amusing. Yes, they had a tie-in with Krispy Kreme, but once you've decided to do that and they sign on board for it, why not do that? Why not do some cross-promotion? I appreciate it, again, because it didn't start off that way. Okay, let me get into some departures from the original show that I like, lest you think that my main issue with this is that it is not exactly Mighty Morphin Power Rangers put on screen. I like that the kids don't all know each other in the first place. That's so easy in the Mighty Morphin pilot. Oh, well, there's these 5 perfect kids that do no wrong. They've got attitude, except they don't, that are all best friends already. Let's make them the Power Rangers. I think it would have been okay if, 2 of them were already friends, but no, none of them know each other. That works out just fine. Rita actually comes right into one of their houses and is menacing, and of course you would know that if you knew the Rangers' identities. Now, Zordon says, of course, one of the 3 rules, I like that the 3 rules are in the movie. Again, they're just adapting the first episode, but I like that it's in there. Says you can never let anybody know your secret identity, which is not helping them against the bad guy who knows their identity because... Did I miss something? Is she just... Because we don't even see her following them around? I've watched this movie, if you count my viewing with the commentary, 3 times in the last 2 weeks, and I cannot figure out how Rita knows any of the stuff she knows. Maybe she can see the future just like Zordon can. I just got a super chat here. Let me read this real quick. Actually, I will... No, I've got a bunch of good stuff here. Yes, I will go ahead and read the super chat. Thank you so very much for that. That is a $20 super chat, and the support is very, very much appreciated. Michael Austin, with this remind... Pardon me, I can't talk this evening. With this rewind, it's like you're literally taking the words out of my mouth. I wish I had sent you the script I wrote for a Power Rangers reboot at some point, because now, if you read it, you'd just think I was ripping you off. Oh, wow, crazy. You know, I think a lot of us Power Rangers fans have been thirsting forever for, again, a sophisticated but still fun Power Rangers thing that just fleshes out mythology and gives these characters more personality. And now the comics have given us a lot more of that, and so it doesn't feel like we're starved for it, if you read that stuff anyway. And there's a lot more Power Rangers stuff in general for adults. I've talked a lot about the Power Rangers Heroes of the Grid board game. The Power Rangers lore feels almost like an extension of that game now to me. I'm such a big fan. I'm so invested in that whole thing. So I am more satiated than I used to be, but I'm with you, Michael. I, for the longest time, wanted to put together my own origin of Zordon story, because I had a lot of really cool ideas. I've done a video about that, and I have written half of it as a fan novel. And for the longest time, I didn't want to do that because I felt weird about doing fan fiction, and, you know, I want to write some original novels and things, and I was like, this is never going to go anywhere. What is the point of this? But I had to get it out of my system because I had these ideas for, you know, really fleshing out who Zordon is and what his pacifistic philosophy is all about. And I won't get into the whole thing again right now, but I still might finish it at some point. I gave up on it when the Boom Comics finally gave Zordon a backstory, and they did a few of the things that I was doing, but my mythology and background was very, very different. I made the dinosaurs a religious thing with the Eltarians, which I still, or Eltarians, which I still really like, and I did also a lot of 1995 movie mythology in mine too, which was really fun to write, because I knew that could never be done anywhere anymore, so might as well mess around with that since it's not, you know, official anyway. But thank you so very much for the super chat, and now I'm going to get back into stuff I liked in this film. So more departures from the original that I like. We see the Rangers' families, and they have regular problems to contend with while trying to save the world, although I do wish there was more of an emphasis on juggling responsibilities, because that's a huge part of being a kid in high school. You get one token scene with Trini, whose mother is asking her where she's been, and I don't like that scene, but it's the only scene that really deals with it. And it's another reason that I wish, and I'll talk about this later, there were some overachievers and academic scholars on the team, and not just juvenile delinquents. There's interpersonal conflict between the Rangers, but they find a way to work together at the end of the day, and they don't start off just full-on hating each other for no good reason. There's some real chemistry with this team. There's a surprisingly decent balance with all of that. It might be too angsty for your taste if you don't love teen dramas. My wife couldn't deal with it. She thought this movie was ultra boring, and it is in places. I agree with that, but she also just doesn't like teen angst stories ever. So your mileage will vary. The command center, reimagined as a spaceship, is fine. It's also from Man of Steel, but that's probably where they got that idea, but I think it works fine here. Okay, other good things. Casting performances, especially Billy and Zordon. I like how broad Elizabeth Banks goes as Rita, even though her character is a little half-baked, the kids feel like authentic modern teenagers, and there's a good balance between angst and levity, as I just said. Best chemistry between two characters in the movie, I think, is Jason and Billy. And by the way, I think Billy is the MVP in this movie. I love the mutual respect between the two of them from the beginning. Jason doesn't like bullies and doesn't judge Billy just because he's autistic. He also looks away as soon as Kimberly takes her shirt off in the woods, not wanting to be a peeping Tom. So he is surprisingly mature, which makes you wonder even more why he is so self-destructive. Billy is super likable and believable. I love that his autism is played as endearing and earnest. It's not just token first autistic superhero. He's not played as a victim, and it's able to have fun with his having autism without making fun of the condition. Like, he has his own unique personality, and that stuff is the best writing in the piece, I think. Some of it is also improvised, so the actor deserves a lot of credit, too. That's R.J. I can't remember his last name. Seiler. There is some good setup and payoff in this movie, not as much as I would like. It's not a super tight script, but I'm fine with the slap at the beginning to the Megazord slap at the end. That almost didn't happen. They did not come up with that in the original script. That tells you the way this was plotted. And Billy not wanting to be touched when Jason hugs him at the beginning, and then he hugs Jason when he comes back to life. That's decent stuff. That's some good character progression. There's some nice cinematography here. I don't always like the way the movie looks, but particularly with the water portal that leads to the ship, that's kind of original. I like that. Alpha's design is not bad. I like that he has that perpetual smile built into his head, although when he's really sad that Billy died, he's still kind of smiling, so it's kind of eerie. And I like Zordon's redesign fine, especially his head moving around the wall to talk to each of the Rangers. I appreciate that the crystal is the Zeo crystal, even if it being responsible for creating all life in the universe is silly. If the Rangers ever needed the Zeo Crystal for power, a whole world would have to die first. Although it could be interesting in a later movie if they defeated a villain that had a Zeo Crystal to use something that was taken in a genocide for good. You know, use it for good. But obviously, I wish there was a lot more actual lore used. So, you know, that's the sort of thing they should be doing. Oh, you've got a big crystal that's your MacGuffin. Call it the Zeo Crystal. I wish they had taken that further, because there were a lot of other things that they could have done that with. I like that Zordon is a little ethnically ambiguous in this version. And he borders on straight up awful and unlikable until he brings Billy back to life. And that whole thing is kind of gimmicky and easy, but at least it's something for him to use to become the actual mentor of the piece. His getting desperate and using the Rangers to, under the pretense of helping them become a team to save himself is interesting. It shows another way that power can corrupt. He's doing the wrong thing for the right reason, and who knows how far he might take that because of his own insecurity. In danger of Breaking Bad like Rita. Cranston is obviously the perfect choice for this version of Zordon. I think they're probably writing to Cranston quite a bit, but man, do I wish he had better material to work with. He has some of the weirdest and most baffling lines in the movie. I don't know why. I've liked this since the first viewing, but one of my favorite moments in the movie is in the montage, where the girls bond over a donut fight. That was originally supposed to be a scene all by itself and had one of two cameos from Amy Jo Johnson and Jason David Frank, and then they show back up again at the end. I don't know why they cut it the way they cut it, and I think they probably could have gotten them in the montage also, but I like it as part of the montage with that song, Hand Clap by Fitz and the Tantrums. Oh, I also really appreciate that this movie has nothing to do with terraforming. That was shocking to me. And that Alpha is not voiced by Patton Oswalt. He's Bill Hader. That was also shocking to me. We cast Patton Oswalt for everything. I'm tired of it. Jason's "You Did an Awful Thing" speech is the thing that most resonated with me in the movie. I talked about that earlier. Best cue in the score, orchestral music cue, is when the Rangers finally morph, the electronic bit. It is, in my mind, the only memorable thing in the score, and I wish the whole movie sounded like that. And then the mirroring scene of the kids descending into the place that will give them their transformation, with coming out of that same place in costume and then fighting putties in the water, is a good image. Again, I wish more of the movie was plotted that way. Give me just a second. Okay, before we get to bad stuff, and this will kind of be part of bad stuff, I'm going to get into some missed opportunities. So, Zach is enamored with Trini, or Trini, the crazy girl, but that is dropped as soon as it's revealed that she's a lesbian. Shouldn't Zach still have feelings about this? It's like, because we're supposed to sympathize with her plight, his interest in her, which was real prominent before, has to completely evaporate. And it would have seemed even crazier if some of the deleted scenes or extended scenes were left in. There's a part where, I mean, his interest in her is undeniably romantic. The part where they crash in the cave and she says again and pushes him off, that scene was originally extended, and he says, "At least I let you be on top this time." Like, he's very clearly sexually interested in her, and it would be a really interesting situation, I think, for him to still have feelings for her and still like her, and at least let us see him, give us one token scene where he says something about it, deals with it. It's really weird that it's just completely dropped once you get the kind of bombshell the way the movie wants to play it anyway. I don't know in 2017 if that's anything like as shocking as Israelite is talking about it on the commentary, where it's like, maybe more then than right now. Things really have changed quite a bit in the 6 years, I'd say, where now it's really trendy to deal with that kind of stuff in movies, even aimed at families and children. And at the time, maybe it would have been more risky. I don't want to take anything away from them, but I also feel like, I don't know, I wasn't surprised by it. I don't know how many people were, but that's not the point. The point is, they play it like this big reveal. Oh, okay, she is not interested in guys, and then we don't deal with his end of that at all. I suspect falling for someone who doesn't have your sexual orientation is a more common thing that teenagers have to deal with than, I saw when I was in high school. So, like, they're trying to do a lot of stuff about today's teenagers. That's an interesting situation. Why don't you deal with that? Avoiding a romance between Jason and Kimberly, I think, is a missed opportunity, and they're doing it for fear of her becoming his love interest. Israelite talks about that too. Well, they're equal protagonists. They'd be each other's love interest. This is driving me crazy in modern movies, and it's worse right now than it even was then. But, like, these two have real chemistry. Romance was always part of the original Power Rangers. I don't think it's modern or more progressive to just completely avoid any kind of romance in your story. Yes, it can be too stereotypical if you do it the wrong way, but I don't think the lesson we should learn from superhero movies and all kinds of movies that take two characters and make them fall in love too quickly is avoid ever letting characters fall in love. You're talking about a normal, basic part of human existence. Teenagers get into relationships, and it actually wouldn't have seemed forced if they kept the kiss that they cut from the movie. I thought it was a natural place for that to happen, actually, and this would have been a case where it didn't seem all that rushed. I almost wish the movie had even gone all the way and actually had Jason and Kimberly try to run away together for a minute, like they were going to at the beginning of the movie, maybe having to return when they realized they had superpowers. Okay, I'm going to switch gears for a second and go to things that are so missed opportunities based on the actual show that maybe they should have run with what they've got here. How does Rita not make a fish monster in this movie where she is picked up, where she gets picked up on a fisherman's boat? Yeah, she's got to make Goldar, and I'll talk about that because it's stupid. But really, you got no fish monster in this movie. Do you know how many fish monsters are in the first 2 seasons of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers? Answer, it's a lot. Trini is afraid of heights in the series. It's in like the 2nd episode. Kimberly, in this movie, pushes her, and of course, this Trini is completely reimagined. I mean, like, kind of nothing but the name is kept in that character. I think every other character, there are similarities to the originals. They're very dramatically, changed. But Trini is not the same character at all. And anyway, it's kind of weird that, Kimberly pushes her from a high place into the water, and there's nothing connecting to the being afraid of heights thing at all. Billy is deathly afraid of fish in the original series. That character gets tied up here on a fishing boat surrounded by fish, and Jason's father is also a fisherman, and nothing is done with that at all. Jason's father looks like a middle-aged Austin St. John. Why not try to cast St. John? Instead of throwaway cameos from Amy Jo Johnson and JDF, whose character isn't even, Tommy, isn't even in the movie. And of course, rest in peace, JDF, and I'm not saying that I wish those two weren't here at all necessarily, but it's kind of lame the cameos they went with if they were going to do that. How about not have cameos? How about have a couple of the original actors play parts in this? And not the Ghostbusters 2016 way. Like, let them be part of the supporting cast. Now, maybe they didn't want to be there, but I'm sure nobody asked Austin St. John, and it's crazy how similar that actor looks. Okay, so this is maybe a stretch, and this might just be me, but I'm bringing it up because I thought of this on first viewing. There's a transition shot where you get some landscape. I can't remember what exactly we're looking at, if it's wreckage or what, that is in the opening scene after Zordon and Rita in their Ranger suits. And you see a shape that looks suspiciously like the top of the Dino Megazord. That was the original series. And that was the first thing I thought of when I saw the shape of that. And then it transitions into a shape that looks even more like that, that's the top of the cow in the prank scene. And I'm like, how do you have that kind of foreshadowing and then your Megazord doesn't look at all like that? Again, that might not have been intentional. That might just be a weird coincidence. But it's kind of suspicious, like 2 minutes into your movie, and it already looks like you've got Mighty Morphin iconography, and then you don't go there. You have a bully. Name him Bulk or Skull. You have a principal. Name him Kaplan. None of these characters are here. So Rito is not here. Rita has a gold motif, and she's after the Zeo crystal. Zeo and gold. There's no reference to Triforia or anything with the King kanji or anything there. Okay, I mean, I'm saying this as a big Gold Ranger fan, but like, throw us a couple more bones, right? It's a missed opportunity that Rita and Zordon are never on screen together again in the present. And it's also weird that Rita calls the big hole that the Megazord, or that all the Zords get thrown into before it becomes the Megazord, the pit, and there's no connection at all to the training area that was called the pit, even though that was also just brought up a couple seconds earlier. It's just kind of sloppy writing, I think. Okay, we're going to get into bad stuff, and I just need like 30 seconds, guys. Hold on. My apologies, I am slightly stopped up right now. Okay, moving on to bad stuff. We're getting there, folks. So, the movie starts out overly serious and ends overly sappy. In my opinion, it spends the whole movie waiting for your heroes to learn to morph, which only works, and look, I realize that I opened the movie with broadly a lot of bad stuff, but I wanted to explore the kind of tonal issues with this piece. I'm now just like good stuff going to get, as I always do, going to get more in detail with more specific things that I think are not working with this movie. If you spend the whole movie waiting for your heroes to learn to morph, to get their superpowers, get their costumes, whatever it is with your superhero thing, that only works if A, the lore makes sense, B, I am invested enough in the character drama and it doesn't seem too contrived, and C, if the superhero stuff at the end that you've been waiting for the whole movie is engaging and exciting. And this fails at all three. It should be good things come to those who wait, but the ending doesn't blow me away. There's a lot of good ideas here that just aren't supported by execution. Why is every ranger here but Billy basically Tommy, right? Like, when you get to the after credit scene, it's so weird that you've got a jacket there and the guy's calling for Tommy Oliver and he's in detention. Like, you just saw that character 5 times, or at least 4 if you don't count Billy. So you've got all these characters that are outcast, they're antisocial, they live dangerously. I find myself thinking, well, then Tommy's not special. Like, what made him different was that he was the outsider, but this is a team of outsiders. As I said earlier, why do they all have to be delinquents? Why do the coins choose them? It kind of has the attitude that all teenagers are screw-ups and have to learn everything the hard way. They all have distinct personalities, and that's good, but why not have an overachiever in there, like I said earlier? Why does Jason have to be a loser, too? He was the captain of the football team. Wouldn't it be more interesting if you explored characters in some more drastically different situations? Like, what if Jason doesn't want to be a ranger because it would ruin his chances at a scholarship? I never want to rewrite the movie, and what's there is okay, even though I don't really get why he's doing all these pranks. But I can't relate to a kid who throws his future away for a prank. You could include a character who everyone can see themselves in, and I don't think this succeeds at doing that the way it thinks it does. Why does Rita single Trini out as the outsider on the team? They're not working as a team. They're all outsiders. And if you had to choose one, it's Kimberly over Trini. She's the one who's worried that they can't morph because she thinks she's a bad person and can never change. Like, at this point, Trini is starting to open up to everybody a little bit more at the moment that Kimberly is saying, no, not tonight, like real melodramatically. Skip me. Wouldn't it be more interesting if Rita went after Kimberly? And also, wouldn't it be more interesting if she tried to seduce one of them to the dark side? It's really weird that doesn't happen. Maybe because we have to wait and do it with Green Ranger, but then you could have one that she's trying to do that with, and they stand up against her, and it doesn't work out. And then in the next movie, you actually have one that does that, that becomes the Green Ranger. In the Boom comics, she actually goes to Zach first, and he is able to stand up against her, and then keeps that a secret for a long time. And I know that wasn't around yet, but it might have been cool if the movie did something kind of like that. Okay, this is where I want to get into the metaphor of the armor. And I was hesitating for a second because I was like, how have I not talked about this yet? We're already in bad stuff. So I'm going to talk about something that I love on top of something that's not working at all. May the power protect you is made too literal in this movie. Now, the metaphor of the armor only appearing when your heart is in the right place and when you're willing to put yourself on the line to protect the team is excellent. I love that. Highlight and underline that. But most or all of their powers shouldn't work until that happens, or morphing is stupid. Again, the idea that your heart has to be in the right place, you have to be willing to put your life on the line before you're able to morph, is is actually kind of genius. It makes a lot of sense that if the Morphin Grid is this sort of like moral, and we don't know what it is in this movie, but if it's in the original more than this, but we still don't really know. But if the Morphin Grid is this almost like moral energy, only works if you're not abusing your power, if you're using it for the right reasons, you're not taking your fight to the enemy, you're giving enemies the benefit of the doubt, giving them the chance to do the right thing, even if they likely are not doing that, and also... And also, again, you care as much about your team as you do yourself, then you're able to morph. That's awesome. But if it's just armor, and you get all your powers first and you can use them anytime you want to, how does nobody ask, none of the Rangers, hey, it's just a costume. Why does it have to be inside of us and then we morph it? Morphing doesn't give us any extra abilities. Why don't we just put it on like any other clothes? And why does the Morphin Grid need so much energy, mass amounts, in order to the point where it would resurrect Zordon? I guess that's opening the Morphin Grid in the first place, but my point still stands. Why do you need that much energy just to put on a costume? Like, okay, it looks like there's a tiny universe inside of it. You'd think that would be the thing. You know the like spiraling like cosmos that you see in the chest of it, and that's really cool looking, and I like that. But like, you'd think that would be the thing that gives you your powers, but no, you just need this really super powerful energy ball thing called the Morphin Grid in order to put on body protection. That is pointless. And then it is a terrible idea. Like, who in universe came up with this? It is a terrible idea to give superpowers to delinquents and then hope they figure out how to be selfless. Like, imagine if this is how the Green Lantern rings worked, where instead of giving them to somebody that had willpower, you gave them to somebody with rage, who had the potential to use them right because they also had willpower, instead of getting the Red Lantern ring. That's preposterous. You could do a lot of damage before you're allowed to be protected, especially because the power seems to mostly already protect them. They survived a train crash. They didn't need to morph in order to do that, and we don't know how they survived it. So you have to just assume they're that durable. Is it possible they teleported? Yes. Do we know that for sure? No. So... and there's lots of other things that they survive or that don't hurt them as much because they have superpowers. They're a lot more durable. I mean, so Billy just died just because the script decided that that's what would happen in that scene, but they're clearly, again, way more durable than before they got powers. It is a truly bizarre set of rules for Galactic Protectors, and whoever came up with that is an idiot. And if it's Zordon, he sucks. Speaking of Zordon, he is too cryptic. Just tell the kids they have to learn to put each other first, instead of these easy cryptic phrases like think only of each other. I mean, that's probably what he means, but at some point, why don't you just come out and say, look, you've got to be willing to put your life down for your friends. Why not tell them that? Now, again, maybe he's seen the future, and if he tells them that, they'll never actually be able to morph, and Rita will win. I don't know. I don't think the movie is thinking about that. And the kids are also a little bit too dense to not put some of this together for themselves. That on top of, like the think only of each other thing, shed your masks, all of that on top of Billy morphing after he steps between two kids coming to blows, should tell them mostly everything they need to know. But because they're dense, Zordon should be saying more to them. Rita as the original Green Ranger is a cool idea, but as I alluded to earlier, if you lead with an evil Ranger, it makes the very idea of Power Rangers seem like maybe a bad one. The heroes really shouldn't just clean up their own mess in their first outing. It's playing with the trope of heroes creating their own villains, but in this case, it's a villain created by an intergalactic peacekeeping team, who right away we see all the flaws in. This power can somehow be corrupted. Since there's no discussion on how that happened, the rules seem stupid and poorly conceived. Maybe because there's a long history where the Power Rangers did a lot of good before this happened. To be fair, Zordon does say the Ranger teams before you, so I guess that's supposed to be true. But for me, it's a bad first impression, and it's way too typical for modern superhero movies where there are so many villains that are just evil versions of the hero, like evil Iron Man, evil Venom, etc. You want an evil Ranger later. You want the evil Six Ranger thing, but you get it right away before Tommy, which means if you did Tommy in the next movie, then you've got evil Green Ranger essentially twice in a row, and you got to start thinking maybe the Power Rangers create a lot more problems than they solve. And I guess if the story was about that, I'd be more okay with it. But even in something a little bit grittier, I don't know if I want that for Power Rangers when the whole point is supposed to be, the pacifism until you're forced. I mean, it's also about whether or not you can hang on to power without it corrupting you. And again, long history of evil Rangers and Power Ranger stuff. But I don't think I'd want that every single time. The look of everything except the costumes is not very good, especially the Goldar and the Megazord. Goldar is just an ugly, dripping pile of goop with no face, and the director in the commentary acts like he is terrifying and wholly original. It's taking too many cues from BVS and other movies with really unimpressive designs, uninspired, big monster designs. He says, we've seen characters like Goldar over and over since the original series. And so we wanted to do something different. Oh, you mean cool, menacing henchmen with personalities? Yeah, you can't have that. We need more mindless golems. Maybe if it was an inspired design and actually evoked some terror, but it doesn't. You've got characters that feel well developed with motivations and situations that are not. I've talked about this already, the question of what leads Jason to pull that stupid prank, etc. It's a story that's built on conveniences, and the biggest one is you've got 5 kids. I do need to break this down. You got 5 kids that find the coins at the same time Rita is found, and she goes after the crystal. Those two things have no correlation. They have nothing to do with each other. One does not cause the other, and I was totally baffled by this in the theater. I cannot believe we've not learned our lesson at this point. This makes it feel more like a movie that was put in a drawer back in 2005. How is any superhero movie still doing this? Like, I get that you haven't been a tentpole franchise before, Power Rangers, but catch up. You got all these Marvel and DC movies that are doing a lot of really contrived and convenient things too, but nothing this bad, most of them. It's made even worse because Billy says at the beginning that the mine is about to be demolished in a week. I'd never noticed this until my most recent viewing. So that means that if Rita had been found 8 days later, there would be no Power Rangers because they couldn't have even gotten to the mine. But I guess destiny compelled them to go there, or it was fated or whatever. It would be so easy to just make this a consequence of Rita being found. So Jason's dad, and by the way, it doesn't matter that it's Jason's dad, and it took me 3 viewings before I even realized that's who it was. Jason's dad, the fisherman, finds Rita, and then Zordon chooses 5 teenagers with attitude. The movie wastes so much time with the mystery of the coins and the spaceship, and it would have been even longer if some of the deleted stuff had been put back in. Probably 12 to 15 minutes of that is just them walking around the spaceship. I kid you not. It's insane how much more boring that almost was. The movie may waste so much time with the mystery of that just for ambiance, and you could still tell a character-driven story that's more about the Breakfast Club of it all and let them meet Zordon earlier in the movie. Why do modern origin stories have to stretch this stuff out for 2 whole acts? Establishing characters and status quo is good, but it doesn't feel like a natural unfolding of events here. The director thinks he's made a totally original superhero movie that subverts so many expectations, but look at a lot of reboots and newer origins, and it feels like it's plugging in for a formula. He says that you don't expect the Rangers to spend most of the movie trying to learn to morph. I mean, I kind of figured it would happen earlier than it does, but yeah, I did kind of worry about that. And then it spends a lot of its time watching the kids stereotypically feel out their powers, like Raimi's Spider-Man. What else? Okay, so there's a lot of weird dialogue in this movie, and I'm not going to break everything down, of course, but Kimberly has that bit where she says, "It's strange to hear you say my name" to Jason when they're out in the woods. I get they're teenagers and there's awkwardness, but that is a weird line of dialogue. Like, they go to a school in a small town. They don't have to be friends for him to know who she is and call her by her name if he thinks she's in trouble in the woods. And then the dialogue writing when the kids meet Zordon is embarrassing. Alpha has to explain what adolescence is. Like, every humanoid species in the universe wouldn't have that. Like, was Zordon born as an adult? And there's so many questions that aren't asked. Like, it's more about paring down to the exact exposition the director thinks matters in that moment than characters operating naturally. And then when they do ask questions, and I'm laughing so hard at this on first viewing, and still now, very often the explanation is theme-based rather than a real logical response. Example, Zordon calls Jason by name, and then Jason asks Zordon how he knows that. Zordon's response, "Because it's you, Jason Scott. You're the Red Ranger." It's not an explanation. Oh, maybe it's because he can see the future. I think a magic crystal being responsible for life existing on every planet is almost too ridiculous even for Power Rangers. I can't decide. I was also kind of shocked that they went there in the movie. Or like, really, you guys just came up with an explanation for why life exists that's just a crystal on a planet? And if you take the crystal out, we've never found this crystal? Like, how much energy is it irradiating? Scientists have never discovered that. Okay. Kimberly has a look on her face when Zordon says that I was making in the theater. It's great. Go back and look for that. When we finally get to the costumes, the Rangers almost immediately have to recede back their face masks. I hate that. It's really lame. We do that way too often in superhero stuff. I complained about the lack of morphers, and there's also, and it's weird too because they have their power coins where a belt buckle should be, but they don't actually morph. And I'm wondering what the point is of, I guess the reason they have to stand on that deck thing is just to get the morphin grid to open in the first place, maybe. Because I was thinking, why do you have to stand on that to morph if you can just think about morphing and have your heart in the right place and then you morph? Because otherwise you'd have to go back to the ship every single time you wanted to morph. And I don't think that's the idea, especially because Billy does it without that. So that must be what it is. But they also don't have power weapons. Like, everybody just has the same sword that's an extension of their arm. Or is it just Jason that has it? Does Jason have that sword and then nobody else has a weapon at all? Mention to me in the comments, if you will, if you noticed a place where somebody has a different weapon than a sword. Because I did not. But the fighting before they get in their Zords is like 6 seconds. I hate the bit where Zach steals his Zord. It's so contrived, and it's worse than I thought it was too. It's now that I'm sinking my teeth in all this, just to have some sort of action. He steals his Zord. In this, what do you call it, action movie? When we're an hour in and our heroes haven't suited up yet, and it's an easy reason for Zach and Jason to throw down, like Kirk and Spock in Star Trek 09. Like, that's the reason that it's contrived to be there. Sure, he's crazy and a thrill seeker, but he doesn't seem stupid enough to do the fizzy lifting drink thing and just jump right in the Zord. Plus, what is the point of the link up in the back of the suit if you can get in it without morphing? Again, I don't get why morphing gives you armor and nothing else. But like I said, it's even worse than I thought, because I thought I had notes about this, but when they're walking away from Zach, and then Jason's like, "Hey, Zach, come on." And he's like, "Yeah, I'm coming." He gets in the Zord. He busts through the wall, what looks like almost Vasquez Rock, which is kind of fun because it's supposed to be the command center. And he almost runs into some nuns on a bus. And in the time that it takes him to do all of that and come back and break back through the wall, the rest of the Rangers are talking to Alpha and having the same conversation they were having as they were leaving, which couldn't have been, and then they turn around and they're like, hey, where's Zach? 20, 30 seconds is all that possibly could have been, which means he, without them noticing, got in the Zord somehow, this huge monstrous thing, figured out how to turn it on and get it to drive, even though after that you would assume that you would need the suit plugged into it in order to drive it. And he does all of that in like 25, 30 seconds. This movie wants me to ask no questions whatsoever. There's a lot of build-up to things that are anticlimactic. The actual Power Ranger action at the end, the importance of the armor, even Kimberly's big horrible secret about the picture. Like, none of these things are satisfactory when we finally find out about them to be worth all that weight. When Billy dies and the Stand By Me cover plays, I laughed out loud in the theater. And also with the Power Ranger theme that we get for 6 seconds in the big fight at the end. The grid opening and giving Zordon the ability to come back to life or resurrect Billy, you can only do one or the other, is so arbitrary and contrived. I think it could work if it was backed by a specific set of rules. I didn't pick up and I can't even say pick up because I don't know if I'm right about it. On this last viewing, like I said a minute ago, I was thinking maybe the idea is there's this huge surge of energy that happens when the grid opens, and then it stays open, and so they can keep morphing and stuff, and it wouldn't be that every time they morph, Zordon's got that surge of energy, which is what I thought it was before, so it's a little better than I was thinking, I guess, but everything about the lore feels so generic that it comes off more contrived than it would have to. We get Make My Monster Grow like 2 minutes after the Rangers finally morph. So it feels like the episode is over before it starts. Did I see this right this time? Both of Kimberly's bullies and Billy's bully from the beginning of the movie, from the first act, get their comeuppance at the same time during the Zord fight and in the same car. Okay. I want to complain that Rita says make my monster grow instead of make my Goldar grow, and that is a total nitpick, I realize, but like, her putties are basically also monsters. And it feels like she's got to say make my monster grow because that's the thing that everybody else, or that everybody in the universe has heard of for Power Rangers. So again, it's that Star Trek 09 thing where it feels designed to make a casual audience feel rewarded for knowing things from cultural osmosis. The movie is also too good for Mighty Morphin in the title, like I said earlier, and it even goes as far as calling it the Morphing Grid instead of Morphin, which just after 30 years of knowing Power Rangers, hearing Morphing Grid sounds weird. But then Jason does say it's morphin time just because that's the popular phrase. So, of course, he has to say that. Okay, I'm going to go through a few questions. I'm going to skip around a bit in the question section here because we're already almost at 2 hours. And I know I had a lot this time. And I've talked about quite a bit of this already, so give me just a bit while I'm skipping through some things here. Why do we get a scene with every Ranger's parents except for Kimberly's? It's cut for time, and it's really short. Like, there was one. It's in the car in the same scene as Jason's dad dropping him off. But that's cut, and I'm not for any good reason, really. Jason and Billy use Billy's van to get to the mine, which takes about an hour of driving time or more. But after that, all the kids keep going up there, and we don't see how. Again, there's a deleted scene that kind of hand waves it, where we see them in another car. But in the cut we have, there's a big deal made out of it takes a long time to get there. And then after that, it seems like it's right in their backyard. How do the kids get back in their respective beds, some of them without their clothes, after they get hit by a train? Just because Kimberly and Jason wonder about how that happened doesn't mean it's covered. This is like Goosebumps logic. How am I still asking what exactly the Rangers' powers are in a smarter Power Ranger movie? Again, they might have teleported, and that would be the way to do it, I would think. Why do the power coins melt the metal on the counter in the cafeteria? Why do they float? Besides just contriving a Nickelodeon kids kind of sequence. Why do the Rangers need armor if their skin is impervious to a boiling counter? How does Zordon see the future? He's like this Drell in Smallville. Like, is he an alien with technology, or is he God? Oh, I love this one. How could Alpha possibly know how long it would take Rita to come up with enough gold to make Goldar? He says, my best guess is 11 days. Now, again, I keep going back to this. Maybe he can read the future, too, or he sees what Zordon was showing them all. But then why would he have to guess? So I don't know if it's that at all. It's ludicrous. Here's another ludicrous thing. Why does everybody see these shiny circular rocks that were stuck in a wall for 65 million years and call them coins? They don't look like coins. No regular functioning human being would look at that and say, oh, look, a coin. But they all call them coins. Why would Zordon think the kids had ever morphed before? Oh, just for another masturbation joke. Other things I've kind of already asked. Oh, yeah, this is a big one. What data is Billy using to find the Zeo crystal? He has all those newspaper clippings and strings connecting stuff on the wall like a conspiracy theorist, but there's no talk about what exactly he's doing. So I don't know what any of that means. And then how does Billy confirm the crystal is under the Krispy Kreme? Again, there's all these scenes that feel like they're followed by missing scenes that we never see and that were never shot. He goes across the street to the Krispy Kreme, then we cut, and the next time we see him, he's at home watching the news. So I don't know what he was doing at the Krispy Kreme when he went over there. Why do the Rangers do a David Fielding impression when they imitate Zordon? It's like they were watching the TV show, and they don't know that he's played by Bryan Cranston. I wonder if he wasn't even cast yet when they shot that stuff and they don't know what his voice sounds like. I just thought of that. If the mine is supposed to be demolished in a week, what happens to the ship? How are the Rangers going to keep fighting evil, if they need to, if that all gets blown up? Like, maybe the ship would survive it, but how would they even get to it? Maybe they can teleport, but, we don't actually know that. Why does nobody try CPR on Billy when he seems to have drowned? I know I'm not the only person that's asked that, but where is the Dragon Zord? Because Rita's got the green coin and the other Zords are there, so I'm assuming there's a Dragon Zord. Now, next movie could explain it, if we ever got one. Why do you have to push buttons on a console if you're linked to your Zord and it works as an extension of you, as Zordon says? Were the Zords designed to form a Megazord in the first place? Rita looks up at it and goes, how? Like, she doesn't even know it can do that. It's like the kids have leveled up in a video game to, like, ultimate love power. And the Zords now, because they care enough about each other, come together to form a thing that it didn't even know that it could do. I don't know. Zordon never talks about the Megazord. We don't know, even though it clearly is designed to do that. I don't actually know if it is. And what is the point of Rita going into Goldar? She already controls him. Okay, I'm going to go into tweet-linked reviews before I give my rating. And I've just got a few, just 4 today. If you would like to make a tweet-linked review for future Superhero Rewind podcast, you can go to patreon.com/geekvolution, and just the $5 tier gets you access to that. You can put in a review and have your thoughts heard probably 2 hours into every show. And at the $10 tier, you can become a Superhero Rewind producer and hang out with me once a month and help me pick things for review, all kinds of other fun perks. But anyway, let's go ahead and get into the tweet-linked reviews. We've got one from Michael Gulick, who says, the movie is underwhelming and mishandled. Power Rangers has such rich potential to explore, and this movie does absolutely nothing with it. Not only does it fail to expand the lore, it downplays or ignores pre-existing elements that give the franchise its identity. I love how you guys very often just boil down the things that took me a million years to say into way more articulate sentences. I really appreciate that. Thanks for being eloquent. Focus on martial arts, costumes, Zords, morphing, and Megazord sequences, supporting cast, locations, theme song. With nothing distinctly Power Rangers, all that's left is a generic teen drama and a ton of missed opportunities. 1 out of 4. Subject 879. Hi, John. It has great characters, and there's some interesting ideas, but ultimately, the Power Rangers mythology doesn't quite come together, and the designs are horrible. 2.5 out of 4. The Day Ghost. Everybody get ready for sarcasm from Austin here. A priest, a minister, and a rabbi walk into a bar. All three give a full sermon, one after another. When asked how the other patrons felt about it, they respond, well, it was more interesting than 2017 Power Rangers. 1 out of 4. And finally, TH1, Tom, well, it's definitely a movie. It feels like it was made by 5 people, but only 2 understood the assignment. I like that. It has some decent ideas, some others not so much. 1.5 out of 4. And despite all my criticisms, I was pretty rough on this one. Like I said, I'm liking it less and less as I'm watching it. I'm still going to go with an even 2 because I do like all the performances in this movie quite a bit. I think Elizabeth Banks' performance is made weaker by just that character being so underdeveloped and kind of a big question mark, but she's still having a lot of fun with it, so that's infectious. And the costumes work better than they should. I don't like the look of much else in this movie, but like Cranston's wonderful. And then, like I said, there's so much like good idea over execution. The notion that you have to care about each other and have your heart in the right place before you can morph is so cool. I really, really like that. And when you compare it to a lot of other superhero movies, it still is middle of the road before it's terrible. And also comparing it to the other Power Rangers movies I've reviewed, one of them got a 1.5 and one of them got a 0. And I think for, I don't know, character development alone, I gotta go to an even 2 with this one. So that's what I'm doing. And now let's go ahead and rank this movie with all of the other films that I've ranked so far on Superhero Rewind. And this one, since it's got a 2 right now, is at the 112th spot down at the bottom here. But I'm going to start popping it up because it's certainly better than Haunted World of El Super Beasto or Kick-Ass 2 or Barbie in Princess Power. I'm not going to name all of these, but I'm just going to keep going up for a little bit. I enjoy the Spirit more than most people, but I think it's still going to go above that. Masters of the Universe, that's kind of tough. Do I like it more than Spider-Man 3? That's a tough one. Do I like it more than The Lone Ranger? I know Austin's going to kill me on that one. I really kind of like the idea of putting it right next to Amazing Spider-Man 2 because they're kind of comparable things, and I think Amazing Spider-Man 2 is better than that, and it still doesn't have the pacing issues. I mean, it's got pacing issues, but not as bad as Lone Ranger. I think I am going to go ahead and pop it above that. So right now, Power Rangers 2017, and all this is always subject to change, is at the number 100 spot for me. It's in the top 100 superhero movies that I have reviewed so far out of, what, a couple hundred? Well, I've done a couple hundred episodes. I think it's more like, right now I've got 157 listed here. Hopefully I'm not missing anything. But anyway, that is going to do it for the review tonight. Next week, I'm going to get out of superhero, and if all goes according to plan, I'm going to do a requested rewind. Go back to the list. I've got just a few more of these to do before I start opening up the Patreon tier again to take rewind requests, which I've not done in a long time because I've had a backlog, but I'm down to just 4 or 5 after this one. So I've got another Bag Studios one. I know I've done a lot for him, but he paid for 7 or 8 at one time, so I'm trying to get those knocked out. And he asked for one on Back to the Future, and I don't know what I'm going to have to add to that discussion. That movie's been talked about to death. I have done content on that. I've done all 3 movies in commentaries and talked about in various videos, but we're going to see what a rewind analysis of Back to the Future looks like. I'm going to do my level best with it. I'm going to try to have fun with it, and I hope you'll come back next week for that. I'm shooting for next week. And once again, Patreon producers get a credit at the end of every episode, and I'm going to say thanks individually for each of them right now. But I want to thank you for tuning in, whether you're doing that live or after the fact, and I want to thank all of our patrons for their monetary support, and anybody who has ever left a super chat as well. And now, let me go ahead and say thanks to all of the Patreon producers, including Bill Millis, Blake, Chewbacca's Lover, David Crabtree, Edward Bador, Elliot Slater, Goofster123, Hot Soup, Joe Turner, Jajira, Joshua, Gilsano, Matt Bat68, Michael Martin, Stone Gassman, Super Billy, the Amalgam Nation, I like that username. That's wonderful. Thomas Edgehill, Adam March, Checkers the Inventor, Damon McGay, Jacob Schneider, Justin Hayes, Kareem Roberts, Matthew Brody, Michael Gulick, Miguel Rodriguez, Wendell Jones, Zach, and Zach. Zach's the last one. Thank you guys so very much. You're wonderful. Really appreciate you. And I am going to go ahead and finish things up right now. Let me go ahead and actually look through here real quick before I finish and make sure I didn't miss a good question, because I didn't go back to you guys right before I finished, and maybe somebody has left a tweet link to review or something. Daniverse, I appreciate that it wasn't a typical super portrayal of an autistic person. Yeah, I agree. Dark Link, I think that's why Billy in the movie is a favorite. For the reasons you pointed out, they're able to have fun with it without it feeling like they're making fun of him. No, and it rings true. Like, I've known folks like him in real life, and there's, you know, it plays as a weakness and a strength for him, right? Like, it's difficult for him to relate to people, but you realize that he like that's a lot of what makes him who he is. He may not have some of the skills he has without that, and yeah, no, he's a really wonderful character. Seven Beetle of Doom, this is interesting. To be honest, I think Michael Bay would have made a more successful Power Rangers movie. I find Power Rangers 2017 boring and repeat viewing. Yeah, maybe so. It's hard to say. I just don't know if anything with this IP does much better at the box office, no matter what it is. It will be very curious. It will be very interesting to see when another one comes out. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get going, but thanks a lot, folks, for being here, and I really appreciate you. I was Captain Logan, and I'll see you again with lots more stuff on Geekvolution this week. Captain Logan show tomorrow night, if you're so inclined to come in for another live show, 7 o'clock Central Time. Later, everybody.